You could easily read 10 business books back to back on 10 separate topics that would just take you in all different directions. You wouldn't know where to focus.
I'm so against just like listening to the latest podcast episode that everyone else is listening to and just reading that thing that everyone else is reading. These books changed my life and they might just change yours. In this episode of Chats with Ben, Ben and I discuss the 7 main books that put us on the millionaire trajectory and made it come true. We're going to talk about the main learnings from each one, the stories, the lessons, and why it was so powerful. I really hope you love this episode. We made it just for you, and here it is.
You read a lot of business books. Maybe not as many as you used to when we were in the agency days. But I remember you would get through business books so quickly. You read a lot faster than I do. And I've read a few business books, but nowhere near the, I guess, hundreds maybe that you've read. And I remember at the time, I wasn't interested in reading the business books. So you'd read the business books, and then on walks or over dinner, you'd basically explain to me what you learned. And then I would kind of digest that and then I guess try and apply it to the business or whatever we were currently working on at that point. And so I guess that worked for you because you were reading it, having to understand it. I was then asking questions where it was not testing your understanding, but like you had to really know what you were talking about in order to explain it to me or to apply it to what I was talking about. But it also gave me a good understanding of what the main points of the books were. So we're going to discuss some books today that I've not actually read any of these books, but certainly for some of them, I feel like I really have a deep understanding, but we absolutely can talk about their impact on our, I guess, business, but ultimately our life, because some of them certainly do touch on how to kind of think about life. And these are some of the heavyweights, I guess, the ones that really made a meaningful impact in the way that we were running the business.
These are the heavyweights, and I read a lot of business books, self-development books, personal development books, whatever, all those categories, the shelf help, as we kind of call them. But these 7 are definitely the ones that made the most difference. And there were more, like these 7 had to kind of fight to get on this list. But when we really thought, no, if we have to distill it down to 7, which ones are they? And I think that time was really fun. Like when it was like running the agency, I would read a book, go talk to you about it over dinner or walks or whatever. But like, I found it so much more enthralling than university, because it was like when I did a business management degree, you did an economics degree, but we weren't running businesses at the same time. We were just learning the theory, but we had nothing to apply it to in practice. And I found that so boring, like demotivating. There was nothing exciting about like lots of the stuff on my course, because it was like you didn't get that like instant feedback loop of I'm going to read a book, I'm going to apply this to my business, and then I'm going to see what happens. And this is why I think these were the 7 books that completely changed our business, completely changed our lives, definitely put us on that millionaire trajectory that made it happen far sooner than it would have done without these books, with us just kind of bumbling along, figuring out everything for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's what we're going to say with each one. They're kind of in chronological order, right? They're kind of,
for sure. Yeah.
Like this was the stage we were at. This is the book that we read. This was the change it made.
Yeah.
So if we'll start from the top and then I guess kind of give the context of where we were and then go from there.
So Rich Dad Poor Dad is the first one. And this was, I think, one of the very first business books I ever read. It was recommended by a friend who is now a really, really great friend called Rob. But we first met on Twitter, and then he came to my office. He was going to be a client. And then we just got chatting, and he said something about how his goal was, now that he had achieved his own passive income of, I think it was like about 10K a month that he just kind of had passively through property. His goal was that he was going to help maybe 300, was it 35 before 35?
Yeah, I think so.
35 other people achieve that same thing of this passive income thing. I don't think I'd ever heard of the term passive income before. I don't think I really understood it at all. But he was like, read this book, read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and then you will understand it. And then like, because you're running a business right now, because you've got a team, like you could be making passive income, and you could also be following the kind of income flows of the book and how it recommends it.
What year was this?
2012, 2013, probably 2013.
Yeah.
And so So at the time as well, so I was a couple of years into running a business, maybe one and a half years, and because I'd done a business degree, I was the only one on my course, or like there maybe was a handful of us who'd started our own business, but most of the people I was friends with from my course were getting jobs in consultancy in London and earning salaries, and we were kind of all at that stage where we were talking about how much we were earning, and pretty quickly I think I realized I was earning quite a lot more than everyone else because I was running my own business and because we were charging clients like thousands a month to do social media management for them. But one thing I noticed with them is that their expenses would go like up and up and up. So it'd be like, oh, I got a pay rise. Oh, I've bought this handbag. Oh, I've bought this thing. And it was like income pays for expenses. And that's the kind of the cycle that they were in. And so the book, Rich Dad Poor Dad, is all about breaking that cycle, the rat race. That is literally the rat race, income, expenses. As you earn more, you spend more. And instead putting your income into assets that then create your future income, and you buy your expenses from that. That's literally the equation.
That's the gist. And I guess the title of the book is kind of misleading, although it is very catchy. It's very like, ooh, what's that there?
Yeah.
I think for a British audience, it's almost it's potentially a bit divisive and disparaging because like no one wants to think that their dad's poor, right? And it's not really talking about whether your dad's poor or rich. It's literally saying, if you do not invest your money wisely, you are not going to create income in a very sustainable and meaningful way.
Yeah.
And a lot of us think of like the house that we live in as an asset. It's something that we own, and it kind of is an asset, but really the way that like a business would work, it's kind of a liability because if anything, you have to spend money to maintain the house. And if you're just spending more and more money on liabilities, like a car or doodads, as they say in the book, you're gonna get trapped in this rat race, and that's basically the poor person's way of thinking about it.
Even in the book, there are dads. I'd forgotten that. That's
yes,
literally
there are.
Robert grew up with like two dads. One was his real dad, who was like
Robert, the author.
Yes, who was like, education's really important. You have to get a good job. You should get a job with security. You should buy a house because a house is your castle, and you should work and you should like kind of spend more and have a kind of better life, and you should, as you earn more, and you should buy the doodads, like you said,
yes,
that make you happy.
It sounds like I read the book.
No, I know, yeah. It does sound like you read the book. But then the rich dad is someone who I think he works for. It's like a dad of his friend who just has a completely different mindset, and who's like, you don't need all this higher education because that's not going to help you in the real world. You need to do this, and you need to work out how to earn money, and then you need to put it into assets, and then you need to get that paying you. Like that's kind of how he gets the equation. Yeah,
because actually the poor has nothing to do with it really, because neither of our sets of parents are poor, but it was a complete reframing of finances by seeing the kind of rich dad. And that's like, how do you create something that is going to actually give you money? And it's actually cash flow. And there's a board game based on the book called Cash Flow. And the goal of the game is to escape the rat race. And once your incomes exceed your outgoings, you then have money that you can basically invest in stuff that is then going to make you money. And so it sounds like really, really like basic, but if someone really struggles with this concept of like making money like passively from actual assets as opposed to just day-to-day spending, it's a really good way of like demonstrating in real life how that works. It's like kind of Monopoly, but Monopoly doesn't really challenge any ways of thinking, but this does. And it did have a big impact on us because I think Rob, not the author, the friend who introduced us to this book, they were making passive income through property, and they were probably quite influential on us in us going down the property route, which we discussed in our investment video, or how we've made and lost money. And so that was influential, but it kind of makes it so obvious when you read a book like Rich Dad Poor Dad that you need to use your cash to create more cash flow. And that was at that point in our lives, that was a really useful book to have read, because it didn't necessarily affect the way we were running our business, but very early on, it got us into a way of thinking, but what can we do with the cash? Because neither of us were ever really into buying the doodads. No. We were never into like buying buying flash things. So you're running a successful business, you're accumulating cash, but what do you do with it?
Yeah.
And that was really useful at the time.
So something that happened at the time as well was Rob, not the author of the book, Rob, the friend who introduced us to the book, he invited us over to come and play Cash Flow, which is like the game. I think Cash Flow begins with a K, but it's the game associated with the book. And he was like, yeah, I'll meet Ben, you can meet my wife, like we can play this game. And so I told you about it, and I was like, yeah, this is my new friend. He wants us to come over and play a board game. And you're like, okay, cool. And I was like, yeah, so we booked this date, and then Rob sent us this email being like, yep, looking forward to seeing you. Like, here's like he included a PDF map to his house. And we were like, wow, this is like, this guy's a big deal.
Yeah, because here's the car parking space that we'll have. And then here's the front door. And it was like a kind of garden that we had to like navigate in order to actually find the house.
And then we got there, we parked in our designated parking space, and we realized that this like, the map that we thought was like this really intricate, like we thought the path was like a kind of big, like they were really big wide roads and everything. It was actually like you could literally see the house from the car park, and the path that we thought was roads was actually like just a kind of person wide path that was going around a park.
Yeah, so I obviously mentioned this to him immediately. It was like just drawing a map from your like driveway to your front door for someone. Because when I first saw it, I was like, whoa, this guy really has like escaped the rat race. This guy's got an absolute mansion on an estate. And I was like, oh no, it's just over there. But
he's gonna love that the map made a video.
Yeah.
So yeah, Rich Dad Poor Dad was definitely the one that started it all off.
Because one of the things that also got us on the path for was like new ways of thinking, and a book that didn't make the list, 4 Hour Work Week.
Yeah.
That kind of plays into it, because although it's a different principle, you can kind of envisage living the 4 Hour Work Week when you start to have assets that are pretty much passive.
I think if anything, the 4 Hour Work Week didn't make the list because I almost feel like that kind of cost us millions rather than helped us make it.
Yep.
And it's partly because we read that book and then it was like, oh my God, we can travel all the time. We can train all the time. We can run this business and we can also live the life of our dreams. So I feel like we became like millionaires despite the 4 Hour Work Week.
Because you're almost like applying the Rich Dad Poor Dad asset idea with the agency. It's like, how do I make the agency passive income? And we kind of did that, but it's not necessarily the way to really scale a marketing agency. And so it really suited us at the time. And I guess you would have called us lifestyle entrepreneurs.
Yeah, for sure.
But it kind of, it took us down a path that maybe didn't mean we blew up the company in a way that we could have done. So maybe that's why it's not on the list. But I do feel like Rich Dad Poor Dad and the 4 Hour Work Week collided at quite similar times to shape our lives.
Yeah. So second book on the list is one by Joe Girard, and it's called How to Sell Anything to Anyone. And so it's a sales book, but it's more than a sales book. And it was recommended to me by my dad. Hi, Dad. And that's because Joe Girard was a car salesman and my dad was in car dealership management for a lot of his career. And so he'd read the book, he recommended it when I first started doing the whole like selling social media services thing. And so I loved this book for many different reasons. I think it was probably the first time I didn't see like sales as a dirty word. I saw it more as a game. When we talked about how the ways that we made and lost money, my main experience in working was hospitality, and that was all about like, how do you get the most tips possible by asking certain questions and thinking of things in a certain way. But that's like, you kind of capped with that because you can only earn so much in your restaurant on your shifts. But when it's your own business, it almost felt like this was how to make it like explode with just different ways of thinking about sales and doing things. And one of the things that I definitely remember in the book was he went really big on reciprocity bias. I don't think he called it reciprocity bias like in Cialdini's Influence, which is another book that nearly made the list but didn't. But the reciprocity bias in terms of Joe Girard would be super simple. And it was when a customer would come to his dealership and look to buy a car, he would invite them into his office. And this was like the 70s maybe. So I think like stuff was different back then. But he would say to this potential customer, who was nearly always a man, he would say, "What do you smoke?" And the guy would tell him, like, "Oh, I smoke," name a brand.
Camel.
I
don't know if
Camel.
that was big back then in the States.
Camels. But... And so Joe would go into his desk drawer, and he would pull out a pack of Camels.
Because he had loads of different brands of cigarettes. He had
every brand.
Basically.
You couldn't name a brand that he wouldn't have in there. And he would give one to the guy. He would give one to himself. He would light, and then he'd kind of toss the rest of the packet to the guy and say, "Oh yeah, have that." And that was the kind of, I don't know what a packet of Camels cost back then, but it's almost like it doesn't matter. The point is, you're giving someone something, you're kind of creating value for them. You're making them think like, "Oh my God, they've really done me a favor here, or given me kind of a gift." And then that person would have this deep sense that they wanted to repay the favor, which then led Joe into selling more cars.
Yeah, and it's also the smoking the same cigarette. It's like, oh, this person gets me. It's also like aligning yourself with that person. And yeah, I agree that it was another mindset shift, I think. And it's a little bit akin to sales not being a dirty word, but it's also something that you can, in the nicest possible sense, like manipulate. There's little levers that you can pull, and it all comes down to psychology, basically. And I think for me, I realized that often people do want to buy the car, or they do want to buy social media marketing services. They do want to buy, but they have all these little objections in their mind. They've got these fears that their primeval like fear things kick in, and you are using tactics to help them overcome those things. It's not like a hard sell thing. It's not like malicious getting money out of people. It's actually helping them get the result they actually want. They actually want these things. And a really good salesperson makes someone feel like, yes, I've bought something that I really want, go me. And so that, and Influence, because Influence is one of the business books that I have read. You subsequently read it. Maybe I wasn't explaining it very well to her, or not sufficiently well. But that's another book that's basically explaining to you how psychology works, and studies of, group A did this, group B did this, group C did this, and group B wins, even though it might be a bit counterintuitive for these reasons. And then you kind of can apply that to any of the mechanisms that you're trying to use to sell. You're like, that might be creating an objection for a customer, or actually this isn't quite serving that need at that time, or we're doing something in the wrong order because we're trying to overcome a bigger hurdle at this point, when actually we should be getting to overcome this hurdle, and then that one becomes easy. And just applying that more analytical thinking to the sales process was probably big then, but we've probably applied that all the way down, because ultimately, like, sales is everything. And you can kind of think, oh yeah, marketing's great. If we have a great marketing campaign, that's going to solve the problems. But depending on what you're selling, marketing can get someone really close, but can it get them to actually part with their cash? And if it's a higher ticket sale, car, or social media marketing services, where someone might be committing to thousands a month over a course of a year, longer, you can't just do the marketing piece. There has to be the sales piece, and knowing that it isn't just someone's either going to decide to buy or not because they like me or not. Knowing that there's actually lots of little tactics, almost like a game you can play. It really empowers you as a business owner to realize, it's not like there's a lot of things I can control here.
I also think that the caveat, the kind of underpinning of all of this, is you have to have this deep sense of belief in what you're selling. And Joe, the author, definitely had that. He loved the cars. We definitely had that at the social media marketing agency, because it was like we knew how much difference we could make. And the founder energy, like I call it founder energy, this idea that if you love what you're selling and if you really believe in it, you can exude that energy. And if you then know the ways that you can talk to people in such a way that you don't raise objections, that you help them get through to the purchase, then it would actually be doing them a disservice not to do that. And there are so many people that we know where they've got a fantastic idea, they've got a fantastic platform, they've got something, and they don't know how to sell, so they never make it. They're the starving artists. And like, no one wants to be, I don't want to be a starving artist in any way. I actually think that's why Tesla is called Tesla. I think Elon Musk named Tesla after Tesla, the inventor, because he was someone who knew how to make all this great stuff, but actually didn't know how to sell it at all. And therefore, the company's named that. Oh, Elon Musk didn't even start Tesla. He didn't start Tesla. It was someone else. But I feel like it was named that because it was almost like giving the recognition to this person who got so far, but didn't get that final kind of sales bit right.
It's super frustrating when you see people as well who are very, very talented, great inventors. They could be a great marketer as well, but they're just really bad at selling.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of like talented, like developers especially, like they feel like they've created this amazing thing and they have to get a founder who knows how to sell. And yes, there are people who like feel like they're natural salesperson people, and they are generally a bit more extroverted, and they have this kind of, they radiate magnetism and charisma, and people want to like buy from them because they kind of want to be their friend almost. But it's definitely something that you can like learn and pick up on. And I think don't tell yourself, you're not good at sales, because it is just something that I guess you can pick up and learn and develop. And that's a good, there are many books on the topic, but that is a good starting point.
So the next one was the E-Myth. And this is a book by Michael Gerber. There's now the E-Myth revisited, and it pretty much introduced the idea of systems and processes to me at the time of running that agency. And I think in parallel with reading 4 Hour Workweek, which happened around the same time, you and I had booked this 5-week trip to Australia that was 3 months in the future, because at the time, the agency completely just relied on me. All the clients relied on me, all the team relied on me, everything relied on me. We didn't really have systems, processes. We hadn't taken a holiday in a very long time. And so the Australia trip became like a deadline of let's sort this out. And I almost feel like we booked that Australia trip after reading the book and feeling like there was a way forward. And so the book follows, I think she's like a pie maker or pie maker. And the kind of author is advising her on how she can get the business to have systems and processes so that it can eventually run without her. And the author's really big on the franchise model, the idea that you completely systemize something to then be able to sell franchises. And we weren't thinking about selling franchises, but we needed to get this one entity that we did have so that it was like vaguely operational without me being the bottleneck for everything. And so the book also fully showed me the danger of being in, like, he calls it technician mode, the idea that you're doing everything, you solve every problem, and you solve the same problem again and again and again, and there's never any like respite from that, because you're always going to be hit with the same problems, and if you always have to solve them, then you never train someone else to solve them, and then you're stuck. And so the main kind of operational things that changed was we made a manual to run the whole business by, and that meant that the team, rather than asking me for the answers to their questions, they asked the manual first. And there's a picture of you with a kangaroo in Australia. Like, we basically were like writing, proofing, getting the manual ready kind of after that trip, after we had all those processes in place. And then it also made a difference to the idea of taking things case by case versus putting a process in place that becomes the default. And I think we doubled down even more on retainer work. And by the time we sold the agency in 2021, we were like 80% retainer clients, which isn't really common for agencies. Like, lots of them do project work. But that book really inspired this idea of, no, we don't want to do project work. We want to do retainer work, because we want to make the default that clients come and they pay and they stay every month and they are really happy and they get looked after by a team that's consistent. And this whole like, it just runs. And then we get to travel, train, yes, look after the agency, but the agency is actually a dream to look after, because it's not like putting out fires all the time.
Yeah, and so it's ultimately showing you, I guess, the why and how of creating SOPs for the business, right? But is it a book that you would recommend someone read now?
Yeah, but not at first, because I think that there's such a big element of being scrappy at first that I think is really valuable. And if it depends what kind of personality type you are, but I am definitely in danger of putting in processes too soon before I've like experimented. So I think there's the messy bit that we were definitely in, which is like go meet as many people as possible, do as many things as possible, read as many books as possible, figure stuff out, test it, then get to a stage where you're like, okay, something's going to break here, and then put the process and systems in place.
But in order to put the processes and systems in place now, so someone's gone through that messy stage, they know they're at the kind of systemizing phase of the business. Is the E-Myth Revisited the book to read, or is there enough out there now that kind of can build your SOPs, like Waybook, for example, which is a software tool that a friend of ours has created? Does someone necessarily need to have read the E-Myth Revisited in order to start creating processes like that?
I think it just gives you the why behind it. So a lot of people will create processes because they think that that's what they have to do, but they won't really like connect with how they're used. And so they will just create processes, set up a tool, like a software tool, and then it will be like separate to their business. It's almost like, yeah, that's the system, but this is what we're really doing. And I think that having that book and seeing it really connected to a business, it's like the theory and practice thing again, which is why like university doesn't always have the practice. But seeing the theory and practice together meant that like that manual that we had for the social media agency wasn't just some like dusty document in the corner. It was like, no, this works. Like if you are following this process and something isn't right or you're doing something different, like update the manual. It needs to be a working document that is live. So I would recommend reading the book because of understanding the real why and making sure it wasn't a separate thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because we very much like, it was like, have you checked the manual? It almost became like, if anyone came for a question, it was like, have you checked the manual? And it was almost something like embarrassing to have to say to someone if they were to then be like, no, because you know full well that help document or that process is in the manual. And so that's the go-to first, which as a manager or the kind of owner of a business trying to get away from the day-to-day is super powerful because you have far fewer people bugging you for things they should already know. But I agree that keeping it up to date is important. But I think that's where modern technology now, the tools like Waybook and just having automations and AI in place, it's really straightforward to create these SOPs and I guess also to update them because you've created a prompt before where you're basically recording yourself on a Loom video doing a process and you're talking through what someone's doing, and then you can feed that into ChatGPT and it will create the SOP for you. And with the right prompting, maybe we should put a link to it in the description. With the right prompting, that will structure it as an SOP with all the little like extra details in it that you might not quite realize because you might have done this process like 1,000 times. You can just do it on autopilot, but for someone who's never done it before, who maybe hasn't used this tool or software before, they're going to have loads of little like questions in their mind, and kind of ChatGPT can preempt what those are like because you're kind of saying to it, hey, assume someone's never done this before, what are all the little ambiguities or things they might not know? And so I feel like once you're on board with the process, it's probably easier than ever, and you won't have to take the manual, which ended up for us being about 60 pages or 60 different processes. So we'd done a lot of the process. We got some of the main ones in place before the trip to Australia to make sure people could manage the company without us, but we were still there. I remember being in Sydney and I remember being in Melbourne, still kind of refining this process and making it better.
Yeah, if anyone is actually interested in this topic in more detail, if you're just like, tell me more about the manual, tell me more about systems, processes, maybe you've got a business that's in this phase right now where you're like, I want to book a 5-week trip to Australia and sort stuff out before then. There's 2 episodes I did on the Built to Sell podcast. The first one was about how to sell an agency without an earnout. And the second one, he invited me back because the first episode actually was his like best performing episode on that podcast, because no one ever sells an agency without an earnout because they're normally very integral to the business. But the second episode, the thing that the host, John, opened up with was like, yeah, I get it that you create systems and processes and SOPs, but no one uses them. Like no one can get their team to use them. And that's another common thing. And so that's the E-Myth, just connecting it all up. And I feel like also getting your team really involved in all of this is so important as well, because it wasn't just us creating the manual. It was like you create that then. This is your role. Write it up so that someone else can do it if you weren't there, and getting them involved in all of it.
And you've rather humbly not mentioned the book that you've written, 10-Year Career, which does have a lot of this stuff in there and how you actually applied it in real life, because it's one of the four basically phases of business, between having the idea and starting the business and ultimately selling it. The systemizing or systematizing phase is like a really big part, and you go into quite a lot of detail in there how you went about that and actually applied it and got people to use it.
Have you read my book?
I edited your book, but I read it a few times. Right, I think it was definitely one of the books that I've read. But you can't put your own book on the books.
No, but thanks for giving it a cheeky mention.
List. Yeah, sure.
So the next book on the list is The Courage to Be Disliked, and this is by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitaka Koga. It's such a good book. It's actually, I think, my number one book all time. It's one of the only books I actually have in a physical form. We travel with it all the way around the world. I've read it time and time again. It's highlighted. It's like the messiest book ever because it's just so good. And why this one leads on quite nicely from the last section, because putting the process in place was so much about the team and getting the team to like feel like they were owners of the business, so that they could take more control and so that they didn't need to be managed all the time. They were more like, we were kind of coaching them after that point. And The Courage to Be Disliked really goes into the kind of team psychology, because it's mainly talking about interpersonal relationships. And the book's got this, so the book's like a conversation between a philosopher and a student. The student's kind of playing the role of the reader because it has all these questions and we're naive, but the philosopher is wise, they're like a wise old sage, and they have the right counter questions, and it's a very beautiful text. And the author talks about how all problems are interpersonal relationship problems. And so one of the biggest teaching points from that book was a thing called horizontal relationships. And the book talks about horizontal relationships as opposed to vertical relationships. And so if you imagine in a team dynamic, there are certain things that managers would say to their team members that would only ever really flow one way. So a manager might say, "Well done, you did a great job. Can you see me in 5 minutes? Can you report this back to me? What's the status update?" All that kind of stuff. So there's things that would only happen one way, which a team member would never say that exact phrase back to the manager. So if you operate in this way of using those kind of phrases, you create a very like vertical structure, and it's very clear like who's got the kind of hierarchy, who's above the other in terms of their role. But horizontal relationships are ones where everything that you say could be said in the other direction too. So a really good example is, instead of like praise, like, "Oh, well done," focus on gratitude. So, "Oh, I'm so grateful that you helped me with this," or like, "I really appreciate what you did," or like, I'm really kind of, I'm grateful to you for that thing that you said," or something like that. And the idea behind that kind of way of phrasing stuff is that your team member could say that to you as well. So after reading this book and testing it out, I took a very intentional way of speaking to my team, and I didn't say stuff that created a hierarchy. And at first I was like, is this weird? Like, will they not, like, I don't know, will they take advantage? Will something go wrong? But what I actually found is that it made them give gratitude and appreciation back the other way. Like, they would start thanking me for stuff. And so it created this like beautiful culture where we'd be just thanking each other for our input, which was so magical. I think that like completely transformed how our team worked. And another thing that the authors say is that praise creates dependency, but encouragement is what builds self-reliance and growth. And all we wanted to do was get our team to be self-reliant and get them to like have the growth mindset as well, so that they could be growing the agency while we had it as a lifestyle business, and self-reliant. So they weren't always like, "What does Jodie think about this? Like, how do I get Ben to help me with this?" It was more like, "Oh, I'm going to check the manual," or, "Oh, I'm going to come up with my own solution to this because I think it's a really good idea because I understand our ethos." So it tied a lot together.
The scope of the book is far wider than that, though.
Yeah, that's like one tiny little thing. Yeah,
I think it's a fascinating book, and it talks a lot about Adlerian psychology, doesn't it, as well? And I think that's why it's an interesting book, not just from a business perspective. I think it's a book that kind of anyone could read at any point of their life, and I think it would be enlightening. Why is it called The Courage to Be Disliked? Because it sounds like if anyone's traveling with it and it's the only physical book they own, it's like they just really want to be disliked. That's what the title makes it sound like.
Why is it called The Courage to Be Disliked? I mean, a lot of that's to do with freedom. The freedom that if you don't care if you're liked or not, you are ultimately free, because nothing can touch you, because you're not thinking, oh, I have to get this person to like me. And it's a lot about dependency. It's a lot about like the freedom from dependency.
Yeah, I figured that might be the case. And I think if people do have, I guess, maybe people-pleasing tendencies, and it's really hard to run a business and a team if you're just trying to please everyone at the same time, I guess that it's helping you basically see past that being the important part of life and making decisions, making calls. I think the Adlerian side, we won't go into loads of detail now, but I guess it's different from Freudian, which is, there's a cause and effect. But the Adlerian psychology, or the Adlerian take on it, is saying actually it wasn't the cause that created the effect. It wasn't the bad driver that got you into some road rage. You actually had the desire to get angry. Something's going on in your life, and you kind of wanted to get angry. You wanted to vent. And basically anything that had happened would have been the excuse for it.
Yeah.
And at first you're like, nah, I'm not buying that. Like I'm in this situation now because of all of these reasons. But as soon as you even just consider the fact, oh, I'm in this situation because I chose it, and all of these things happened, I kind of made them happen that way in order to achieve the situation that I'm in now, because secretly, subconsciously, that was where I wanted to be. As soon as you appreciate that might be the case, it can really change your thinking. It's massive, because you might not accept it for yourself straight away, but you can see it in other people really fast. You're like, oh yeah, but you did this thing and now you're in this position that you're annoyed about, but I could have told you that thing that you did was going to lead there. Like that was obvious. Like you clearly wanted to end up here. So you did that. That was a terrible decision. Why did you make that decision? But their judgment at the time was clouded because they actually wanted a different outcome to the one that they would have said they wanted, or to the one that you'd have thought that they wanted. And so once you see that showing up, and once you have that awareness that might be playing a role in what you're doing and saying, like it's really, really powerful.
Quite a good example is the idea of, so in the book, some of the kind of sentences that you're like, oh, I need some time to process that. One of them is the past does not exist. One of them is trauma does not exist. One of them is you could choose to be happy right now, you're just choosing not to be. Another one is, a big concept is the separation of tasks, just the idea that you should only focus on what's in your responsibility. Don't interfere with what belongs to anyone else at all, because the separation of tasks is a big thing in having good interpersonal relationships, which is the source of all problems. But if you kind of take all that as like, okay, this is truth, I'm going to play with the idea that this is truth, then one of the examples that I quite like is the idea of this thing happened because of this thing. So if you imagine like, I am an alcoholic because my dad was an alcoholic. I am not an alcoholic because my dad was an alcoholic. I am like in a really bad financial situation because my parents didn't have money. I'm in a really great financial situation because my parents didn't have money. It's almost like you can literally choose what you make of like the past. And the idea is that you will match up your actions to the goal. So if I have the goal of falling out with you.
No.
Never.
Impossible.
So if I had this secret goal that I was carrying around, I am going to have an argument with Ben, then I would like basically fabricate situations in order to match up that goal. And so I would kind of go, oh, you left that drawer open, or like this thing happened, or that thing happened, in order to kind of fulfill my goal of falling out with Ben. But if I had the goal of like not falling out with Ben, then I would decide that like thing that he didn't do, that he said, I don't know, whatever, it doesn't matter. But like that thing is just actually not the thing, because my goal is to not fall out with him. you could see it with like failing a lift in the gym. Like if you have the goal of getting this squat, like no one that walks in front of you is going to put you off getting that squat, because you are going to get it no matter what. It's not going to get in your way.
Yeah, literally last week I saw someone had basically finished their squat. Like they basically stood up with it and then they failed it. They dumped it off their back. I was like, what? Like you'd finished the squat already. And it's almost like they wanted the kind of feeling of, I didn't quite make it this week, or I want a bit of sympathy from people around me, because they'd done the squat. I was like, well done. That was a bit of a grind, but like they got up with it. And then just as I thought they were about to start re-racking it, it was drama. And so it's like,
and then she cried, and it's like you wanted to cry. You had the goal of being sad. So you created the situation to make you sad, even though your legs and your squat was fine.
Once you're aware of it, you see it all the time, and it really is mind blowing. But I think I think this is a book that you should do a deep dive on, because there's so many things that we've just brushed over. Like the past does not exist. I mean, that's when you realize, when you understand that might be true from the way that they're describing it. Like it's kind of like a reality shattering concept that we've rather brushed over. So I think you'll have to return. You'll have to return to that.
I will. Let me know in the comments if you want a deep dive on that book, because okay, book number 5 is called Anything You Want, and it's by Derek Sivers, who's a really good friend of both of ours, actually. We spent Christmas with him a couple of years ago, although because he doesn't care about Christmas.
Yeah, it wasn't Christmas at all.
We turned up with candy. He's like, oh, cool, why'd you bring candy? It's like, it's Christmas. But anyway, he wrote this book, and so he is a really cool guy. He sold his business, CD Baby, for $22 million in like early, like I want to say 2012, and then he just put all the cash in like a trust that he doesn't have access to, and it's all to do with like supporting musicians, and he just he basically gave it away. He sold his company and gave it all away, and is just such a deep thinker on lots of stuff, and is a really deep thinker on the subject of simplicity, and that is the kind of message overall of this book. And I read this book before we were friends. We started to become friends because I emailed him after reading the book. But one of the things that's kind of in the book is this concept that there's a man on the beach selling fish, and that's a business. Like when you run a business, you're going to get all these calls like, oh, you need to get this license. Oh, you need to do this. Have you thought about this? Or you should be doing this thing. And it's like, no, stop. I can find the most simple way of running this business, and it can be a success, and no one's going to stop me because I've got the goal of making it a success. And so I think that book probably helped us like go more back to basics, cut out some of the kind of complicated stuff that we maybe had going on. I also feel like because throughout the book he's running his business, but he's very much choosing his role in the business, and because he was the main developer at some point, he was like, I don't want to do this part of it. I don't want to do the marketing. I don't want to do the sales. I want to just code. So I'm going to hire other people to do this. I'm going to live somewhere that's completely different to where the business is actually running, so that I can just do my thing. And so it almost gave us, I feel like it kind of almost gave us permission to be like, who do we want to be in this business? How do we want to run our dream lives? How do we want to run our dream lives like around what we're doing? And how do we make that as simple as possible? That was the kind of big mindset shift that it gave me.
Yeah, I think simplicity is just huge in life and business, because we all have this, we don't all necessarily have it, but we have the possibility of falling for addition bias all the time. Oh, we know that customer might want this service, we can offer that service. Oh, should we roll that out to other customers? Oh, we could productize this, or we could sell this, or we could start other things. And we've been guilty of like starting side projects because we've kind of overcomplicated life, and you kind of want more before you've actually just got the fundamentals in place. And I really think in the business sense, having that idea of like one customer avatar that you are trying to serve, that one product with which you are serving them, and then one channel through which you're reaching them is just the perfect way of doing it. And the guy selling fish on the beach is that. You know, it's so simple once you boil it down to that. And I think obviously you have all these big name companies that you can look at, like Tesla or any famous brand, and they have multiple departments. They're doing all these things. They are doing partnerships, and they've got loads of different tiers of marketing, affiliate schemes and everything. But for probably decades, that's not what they were doing. They were literally finding a product to serve an audience member and a channel through which to do it. Like read Shoe Dog if you want an example of a mega brand now that was not always a mega brand. And
because it's about Nike.
It's about Nike. So I think that simplicity thing is really far reaching. And we also apply a lot of simplicity stuff to life as well, which is simplifying everything, removing friction, removing decision fatigue. Like that's a big part of us as well.
Your business can basically be a really big clunky thing if you let it. I think that happened in agency when we added services. I mean, it kind of worked out, but it's still like you can just add the stuff. And then in software right now, like if we listened to every single thing that every single customer wanted to do, we would have the most clunky mule-like operation, when it's like the main thing is the cutting through it and being like, what do most people want? What are the things that they like really want? Like not just the nice to haves. What are the things that they really mean? What are the things that will actually make the difference to their business? It's like applying that other level of thinking to mean that you make the right decisions rather than just like adding blindly.
And Derek's a great writer as well, isn't he? He's a very clear thinker. I think he's not as well known right now or as high profile as kind of modern day thinkers or philosophers. That kind of, what do you call it? Like
He called it pop philosophy. Yeah.
Pop philosophy. Yeah. He's not necessarily as well known because he doesn't get out and about as much as like other people do that are just trying to drive fame.
Yeah.
Like he has his massive mailing list. If he writes a book, he just sells it to his mailing list. So he kind of doesn't need to do the promo stuff. I know he's been on the Tim Ferriss podcast again, like fairly recently. So he's hugely well known and well respected. But to just the average person on the street, no idea who he is.
But I love that he's just like, I don't want to do that. I just opt out of this thing.
Yeah, but he's a great thinker and a great writer, and from the simplicity perspective, he's a good one. So that's why it's a good book.
And then the book 6. So this is this kind of links because I think Derek is actually buddies with Seth, who wrote this book. Seth Godin, The Practice, and so the time when I read this was around the time when I had my Forbes column. So I'm going to rewind a few steps. So there was a time when we were running the agency when we've talked about this in the video of how we made and how we have made and lost money. But one of the ways that we made money was we wrote a bunch of children's storybooks, and they were all around introducing entrepreneurial role models to kids that were ages 6 to 9. And one of the ways that we really made money with that project is that we sold about 100,000 of those books to a bank to put them into every primary school in the UK to kind of gift them. And so that was one of the biggest deals that we'd had so far. And that led to a Forbes 30 under 30 listing, which then led to being a Forbes contributor. And so that was around the time when it was like, I feel like I was just starting to write books and write articles. And also we'd got different publishing deals to write like the Instagram book and like other things. So it was very much like run a business, have the travel and training around that, but also like somehow figure out how you're going to like consistently produce stuff. And I think that's also because we'd started to see the real input output. Like the more SEO work you did, the more the website ranked for the social media agency. The more I wrote, the more like kind of clients that came our way. That like it was a real input output. But the input was like doing the work and just putting the hours in. And there wasn't really another way around it. There was no AI tools right then that we could have used to like help us out with any of this stuff. Yeah. We didn't have the robots like now. So and also around that time, I think I'd really started to see the difference between the founders who would like doing the work and the founders who had like almost never had the intention of doing the work. And they were just like kind of fanning around. And I met someone who was just going to networking event after networking event after networking event, just like always like kind of in meetings, but wasn't really getting anywhere. And I didn't want to go down that route. It was more like, how do I figure out what to work on and how do I create a process so it just becomes part of my like normal life. And I think the practice is all about creating your practice, and not everyone's practice is going to be the same, but creating your sustainable routine that just means that you can do your art, make your work, put your stuff out there, show up in the world, that just happens on repeat without fail, no excuses, you're going to do it. And the author Seth Godin is a really perfect messenger for this, because he started a blog in maybe 1999. Like I feel like it was a long time ago, and he's consistently written at least one blog post a day for all of those years. He's like the OG blogger, and part of that's because he's got his practice. He's got the thing that he just does. He doesn't even share it. He just, like, it happens. Each day a blog goes out. We don't know when he writes them. We know that he's probably written thousands and thousands that haven't seen the light of day because they've not passed his quality standards. But the ones that get out, like, they're exceptional. All of them are.
You've read a few Seth Godin books.
Yeah, I think nearly all of them. I think he's got 20 books, and that's kind of part of it as well. Like, his practice has led to a blog post a day, 20 best-selling books, and they all really cover one topic exceptionally well, because he's another, like, really deep thinker.
Yeah, I was going to say he's another guy that it's kind of in the Derek mold of, like, being a very good thinker and writer, and so their books they're kind of pieces of art in themselves, right? And I think there's something nice about that when you're reading something that, especially in this case, you're applying to writing, but you're reading a good example of writing from someone who you know has done the work. There's something really nice, because you're reading, like, the actual proof is right in front of you, which I think is super cool.
And Seth is such a good example as well of someone who really values consistent input over time. I think he has a rule. He won't, if you ask Seth Godin to go on your podcast, he won't even consider it unless you've done at least 100 episodes, because you have to have, like, almost earned your stripes with it. And if you think about literally everything that we've ever achieved or done, it's like, it's all the long game, and it's all the results over time that is the really magical stuff. Like, it's our 18-year anniversary in, like, 2 weeks' time, and it's like, it wasn't this good at first. Like, it's like stuff gets better the more you put into it, the more energy you give it, the more of, like, a practice doing stuff exceptionally well it is. And it's the same with training, it's the same with travel, it's the same with business. It's almost like the start doesn't feel sexy, because it's just where you're kind of putting the reps in. Maybe not in a relationship, it's quite the same, but, like, it's the same. Like, it goes up and up and up, but as long as you're continuing with the practice, you see all the stuff that you sow what you reap, or you reap what you sow. You reap what you sow, that's it.
Yeah. The thing, I don't think this is a quote from this book. You'll probably know. It's useful that Jodie also has a very good memory, but it's the idea of people, especially writing, people like really romanticize the idea of being an author or being a writer. And the amount of people that will say, oh, I'd love to be a writer, or I'm going to be a writer. It's like, well, how much writing do you do? And it's like, people want to be the artist without doing the art. Like, they want to be a writer without doing the writing. There's probably other examples, but ultimately the professional writers, the guys that are best-selling authors, they're doing the practice all the time, and they're just getting better at it and honing the craft.
I don't know if it's from a specific book. I feel like I've written a lot about this.
You have.
The thing I always think about is, like, do you want the verb or do you want the noun? Like, how you know someone's never going to write a book is when they say, like, I want to be an author, or, like, how do you know someone's not going to make it, or kind of they're not serious about their craft, is like, I want to be an actor, I want to be a dancer, I want to be a singer, I want to be a something. It's like, I want this noun, but really the ones who make it, I want to dance, I want to write, I want to sing, I want to act. It's like they want to do the verb so much that that's the thing that they put their all into, and that's the thing that creates the noun.
It's not the War of Art, potentially? I
have not read the War of Art.
Oh.
Have I read the War of Art?
I'm sure you must have read it.
Wait, The Art of War. The War
I've
of Art.
read The Art of War.
Yeah, I've read The War of Art.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. No, I don't think it is.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, something.
Yeah, but no, it's a good one. But putting the reps in, I think, is probably the biggest takeaway for this one.
Putting the reps in, and also it doesn't matter about, like, the nuance. So when Seth gets interviewed for his podcast, on their podcast, they'll say things like, oh, what's your, like, writing setup, or, like, what kind of pen do you use, or, like, what's your system? And he's like, doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter. The nuance doesn't matter. The whole, like, oh, like, what time do you go to the gym, or any of this stuff, it just doesn't matter. The thing that matters is just doing the thing.
Yeah, I think that influenced a little bit the way we would have thought about doing the weekly routine video, that the actual specifics are irrelevant, because if you, and I know that he said this before, if I give you the specifics, it'll be, oh, well, Seth Godin does this, I'm going to do it too. And I think we see that a lot with the day in the life or daily routine type things. Oh, well, this guy wakes up at 5 a.m. and then he does this and then he does this. And then I'm going to copy that because that gives me the same outcome. And I think Seth's philosophy that we've been influenced by is that stuff doesn't matter. What are the principles? What are the foundations that you're basing things on? And then you build that routine or practice around what works for you. But this is probably a book or the practice is probably a book that anyone could read, right? At any stage of their career, life, work. I mean, it's not even just necessarily for business people, right? If someone really wants to be good at their job or their profession, that's a book that they could probably learn from.
It's about having a process, and it's about doing the work every day. It's also kind of about being obsessed with something, because being obsessed is the way to just do better than everyone else all the time, because you just care more. And then your work is high quality, and then you just get further. Yeah, it's a really good, solid book. 7th one is called Unreasonable Success and How to Achieve It. And that's very useful if you're on the millionaire trajectory and that's what you want to achieve. So in this book, there are some components of unreasonable success that the author Richard Koch shares. And I think I read this book in between businesses. So we had sold the agency in March 2021. We were thinking about what to do next. We were kind of a bit chilling out, doing some more traveling, doing some more competing, that kind of stuff. And that meant we were post-exit entrepreneurs. And post-exit entrepreneur is like a kind of not very popular phrase, because not that many people have actually exited their business. So it's like a kind of niche group of people who ultimately are kind of having existential crises because they built this thing that's been their identity for a very long time, probably, and now they haven't got it anymore. And so I so felt this after selling the agency, because had it for 10 years. There was a team, even though I wasn't in day-to-day contact with all of them, it was like there's still a team of people who are kind of you're like responsible for. There were clients who, again, as I wasn't in day-to-day contact with any of them, but they were still like part of the thing that was going on. You saw the things that were happening. There was a lot of kind of activity, and you were needed occasionally. And then when you exit, it's like nothing. No one needs you. There's nothing going on at all. And that can be like very confusing. And for a lot of founders, it can lead to this sense of like, what is my purpose? Who even am I? What am I even doing? And so as part of that post-exit crisis, I was like, what do I want to do now? And I was doing a bit of kind of consultancy, kind of coaching, but it was for people who also wanted to sell their agency. And so a really big philosophy of life that I just have is do cool stuff and then teach other people how to do that same cool stuff. And because the cool stuff that we done was sell the agency, it was like, now teach other people how to sell their agency. And so this was going on for a little bit, but it was fun, it was enjoyable, like got some really cool people to sell their agencies. And also that was a lot of the learning that led to starting Coachbox. But I was definitely in this stage of, this isn't really what I want to do. Like this isn't, I don't see my whole life now as being someone who just teaches people to sell their agency. There's like, I feel like for me, there's more to this. And so when I read this book, there's more that we'll cover on the different components of the book and the different kind of unreasonable success factors. But one of them was about this concept of the vehicle. And so if you think nearly every great entrepreneur that you can think of, they're not really like personal brands. Like they are personal brands, but they didn't set out to be personal brands. They set out to do exceptional work. And then the personal brand thing came as a second thing. Like you didn't get like, I don't know, Richard Branson wasn't there with his branding agency figuring out how to like set all his tweets up. He was like making freaking cool companies, and then everything else came after. And the main thing that made that work was his vehicle. So every great founder has got this vehicle that is their company or is their mission or is the thing that they're behind. And that's the thing that leads them to the unreasonable success, rather than it being just about them and just focused on them.
Yeah, sounds good. This is one of the books in the list that I actually don't know much about.
Yeah.
Given the fact that you actually spoke a lot about it when you were reading it. You were like, oh, this is cool, and that's cool. Because I think the title is really intriguing, because it's this unreasonable success.
Yeah.
And I like the idea that you've got this kind of reasonable success, but to the author and to a lot of ambitious people, like, reasonable success isn't actually what you want. You're talking about, how do I get beyond that? How do I get to unreasonable success? What even is unreasonable success? And it plays, I think, to our, like, the antithesis of our logical mind, because we're so reasonable. Humans in general are reasonable. We think reasonably. But if you look at world champions, if you look at billionaires, they actually don't really think like that. And that's what enables them to become redonkulously successful. And I like the idea that that's kind of almost addressed in the title itself of it's unreasonable success. And I think I'm right in saying that in the book itself, it talks about examples of unreasonable success and the kind of thinking and methodology, or maybe philosophy, of what these people were kind of going through in order to get there.
Yeah. But it's in components. Like, it does share the actual specifics.
Sure, but yeah, crack on.
But what was I going to say? Yeah, the idea of unreasonable, I think, is just a really big word, because it's literally only unreasonable people who change the world, because they're the ones who see something as it is and go, no, this could be better. Like, the people who were the most successful in our agency were the ones who saw this manual and that process they had to follow, and then they said, no, hang on, this could be done better, and then they changed it, and then they made it better for everyone else. Like, you see that time and time again, the unreasonable people.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing, no one wants to think of themselves as being unreasonable. Like, it's that, it's like,
entrepreneurial.
I just think like, you want people to be reasonable. Are they being reasonable? Well, that's unreasonable. That kind of, we really don't like it when people are unreasonable. That's like a really bang out of line thing to be unreasonable. We should all be reasonable with each other. And so this is like taking it to you and saying, well, but actually from a success perspective, you do want to be unreasonable. I just really like that. Yeah. That kind of taking that kind of juxtaposition.
So the components of unreasonable success and how to achieve it, so that you can check off which one you've got. First is self-belief. So people who achieve unreasonable success don't just have confidence, but they have an unwavering conviction in their mission and their ability to achieve it. And I know you and I have spoken about this, and just this idea that, like, school doesn't matter, because I can just do the thing. Like, I'll be a success. Like, I just know I will, and I don't know why, but I just will.
Yeah. But I mean, it's also prevalent in people like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. Like, if you look at Ronaldo, yeah, for sure. If you look at their kind of rise to prominence and rise to success, it is very clear that there was nothing in the way of them achieving what they wanted to do. And with Musk especially, it's kind of like, is it physically possible? Like, do the rules of physics actually prohibit this from happening? Because if not, that's what's going to happen. And if you think about becoming a millionaire or becoming a billionaire just as a really top level goal, do the rules or laws of physics prevent you from doing that? No, they don't. That means there must be a way of achieving it. And so having that underlying self-belief is massive. And people like Steve Jobs was always creating, he had an idea, he had that kind of idea of what the perfect product would be, and people would say to him, well, that's not possible. But he always had that kind of belief of like, well, it can be possible, I can make it possible, I can get the people in a room with me to make it possible. And I think you see at the time, I think Jeff Bezos has got there's traits of that as well. You see most world champions, especially in like martial arts sports, I think you see it a lot, especially in boxers. They have this, I mean, MMA fighters, boxers, they come across as super, super arrogant, and they're not necessarily kind of like that day to day, but when they're in like their fighter mode and when they're training, they are just like absolute unwavering belief they are the best in the world at that time. They are going to beat whoever they fight, and that attitude just serves them so well. Because obviously if the opposite is true, is if you doubt that, if you're doubting it, other people are doubting it, those seeds of doubt, like, well, can I knock that guy out? Well, can I get to Mars? As soon as you start doubting it, the mission is falling apart.
Well, that links quite nicely with the second one, which is Olympian expectations, setting goals far beyond what's considered normal. Because unreasonable people don't set normal goals. So I think a big part of that is kind of having people around you where if you make those big goals, you know that you're not going to be like shot down, or like if you are around people who are going to shoot down your big goals, you find new people to hang out with because you've got bigger dreams than that.
And I think we're going to go on to the next point. I'll just down with that one for a second.
One, but you.
Just on that one for a second, I honestly believe that's why people find groups and masterminds of people with the shared ambition. It's why that if someone wants to be an Olympian swimmer, they go to swimming clubs where they've produced Olympians before. Like, it's finding an environment and a group of people where those expectations are the norm. Yeah. Because if you are someone in a small sleepy village or sleepy town and you want to be an Olympian or you want to be a billionaire, no one there believes in you, no one cares, you've got no one to follow, you've got nothing, you've got no infrastructure to achieve it. And that's probably something that I really underestimated. I thought it doesn't matter that I don't have the resources around me, it doesn't matter that I'm not playing for the best rugby club in the county, it just doesn't matter because I can be better. But until you put yourself in the big pond and you test yourself against the best and you learn from the best and you have the belief and the expectation that you are going to be, I don't know, even a professional athlete or a world-class athlete, it's just, your ceiling is so low and you don't even realize it's so low.
So the next one is transforming experiences. And so in the book, this is described as pivotal life events that shift your direction and sharpen your vision. This could be anything. There's loads of stories in the book about this happening. I mentioned before in The Courage to Be Disliked, the idea of like, oh, my dad was an alcoholic, so that meant this. But it could be anything like that. It could be something that happened in the lifetimes of people who achieve unreasonable success that meant that they were just almost, they had this like pattern interrupt, this kind of reality shock of like, oh, do I want to go in that direction? And we've probably had those, actually probably in the books that we've read, people that we've met, different situations that we've been in where it's like, hang on, this is like a crossroads moment here. And they could happen at any point, but they probably happen quite early on. Lots of the examples in the book are things like losing a parent from a young age, going to a different school, moving to a different city, having something like really kind of big happen to them early on.
Yeah, and we know this from the experience that we had writing the Clever Types books and looking into childhood influences. So many successful people had what probably on paper are, really life-damaging experiences, and it almost ties in a little bit to The Courage to Be Disliked, that life-damaging thing could have been, for maybe most people, a reason for them to not go on and to achieve their potential. But these people have really leveraged it, and they probably learned some things. They probably had some, resilience or another trait in them from very early on, and they've leveraged that along with all these other things to become super, super successful. But it's almost like comical how many successful people have something in their life where you're like, oh, that's I'm really surprised that's unusual. That's like would have been an issue at the time.
Yeah, it's nearly everyone we know. Well, the two examples I can think of were, we used to have a podcast to do with Clever Types called Creating Useful People, and we interviewed, I think we probably did about 20 episodes of successful business owners and entrepreneur and business leaders, and so many of them had changed schools when they were younger. One of them, I think, had changed schools like 6 times before he was 12, and it was like, that was the thing, that was the transforming experience that then led them to have to do something different or reinvent themselves or have some kind of self-awareness that led them on a different path. And there's another kind of concept of people are only motivated by 2 things, inspiration or desperation. And for a lot of these entrepreneurial types or people who achieve unreasonable success, it's the desperation. It's the like, I've hit rock bottom, this thing's happened, I have to do something about this, otherwise I'm going to end up like that, and I don't want to end up like that. So then that kind of links to the next one, which is drive. So relentless energy and persistence toward a specific outcome, which is similar to the practice, the idea that you're putting your energy and you're putting your persistence in and you know what you're working towards because you have that Olympian expectation. The next one is magnetic relationships. And the book describes this as surrounding yourself with people who open doors and challenge you to grow. But when you mentioned Steve Jobs earlier, it's just making me think of his it was described that Steve Jobs had a reality distortion field because he was such a visionary, he knew what he wanted so much, and he had this big vision so much that he could then kind of get a team together and kind of rally his troops to be able to all work towards that goal, even though it probably seemed impossible. It was like he just had this kind of magnetism that meant that people were like, yes, I want to be on board with this, I want to fight this mission with him. And that's the thing that can progress your mission.
Even though that, allegedly he wasn't the easiest guy to work with.
Yeah.
He wasn't a likable guy. There's plenty of books and movies about his life, but there was still something about that ambition and the way he was, and probably partly his drive. When you see someone else who's super, super driven, you're like, oh, I want to be part of that, on board the same vehicle, if you like. But yeah, you can see that if you've got enough about you, people will kind of put to one side maybe parts of your character that they don't really like because they just want to be on board.
Yeah. And then also part of the magnetic relationships is like the people that open doors and challenge you to grow, and having mentors and role models in this as well is a thing. We went to the beach yesterday with some friends, and two of them have achieved a lot of success in their coaching businesses, and both of them credit a lot of that success and the doors that opened to specific mentors, and both of their specific mentors were also on the beach trip. So it's like they can kind of point to that person and go, this is the person that opened doors for me. This is the person who showed me this new way of living that then changed my trajectory. So that's prevalent in people who achieve unreasonable success. We've also got preparation. So deep work in a chosen field that creates unfair advantages. And I love unfair advantages as a topic because I really like the idea of everyone has ace cards that they're probably not playing, or they're playing down, or they don't realize that they've got. And as soon as you start to play your ace cards, then you create yourself unfair advantages, because you create a situation where no one can compete with you because you've like stacked all your interests, you've stacked all your ace cards, you've stacked all your skills, and you're like N of one. You're just this untouchable thing that no one could ever like compete with because they just can't. And so that also links to the deep work of the practice, that book. But the chosen field, I think, is kind of interesting because there's some, like if we started like a newspaper business right now, it almost like doesn't matter how good we were or how much of a reality distortion field we had with our team. Like newspapers are on the decline. So your chosen field has to also be something that is rising, that is on a good trajectory, that means that it's going to help create your unreasonable success and not be kind of a fight against it.
Yeah, and that comes back to that principle of like the vehicle, choosing the vehicle. If your vehicle is not in an arena or area that's going up, you're just fighting the tide. And I do think that's really hard in this day and age with the rise of things like crypto and AI. It's changing so quickly. It's really hard to know which industries are going to be really affected by this and which is growing, and they're not super easy things to understand. So there's a learning curve on there. But I kind of think that you can always bring it round to your individual skills, which is the next point really. Force multipliers, which is where are you best placed to leverage those kind of unfair advantages or the things that you're uniquely good at. And that could not just be like your skills, but it could be your network, or it could be, I don't know, it's kind of maybe the things that you have access to, the resources available to you, which it could be cash, it could be other things. But if you can work out how you are best placed to use all these things that other people don't have, it kind of doesn't matter as long as you're on a vehicle that is going to go somewhere. That's how you can kind of decide this is the right move for me, because I've got a lot of like natural kind of competitive advantages, a natural moat around me to actually be able to grow something.
So force multipliers as well, this one, in the book it says, leveraging platforms, technology, or other people's reach to scale your impact. And I'm just thinking this is literally the game we're playing right now with all of our customers at Coachbox, because we're like, AI's around, you can use it as a force multiplier. Here's what you can do. And we're like teaching them exactly how to do that, because it is that we want you to achieve unreasonable success, and here's how to do it. And it's actually one of the 7 or 8 points in the book. Next one, momentum, building and sustaining compounding wins.
Yeah, I mean, sounds great. I don't know what
Let's go.
I don't know what the book actually said about these things. I mean, I for sure am a big fan of things like incremental like gains, incremental improvements, where you can improve like 1% here and there. If you can do that enough, you make a huge impact over a long enough period. And also, of course, momentum. And we feel it with the business for sure. Like when things are going well, like I mean, they're always going well, but like if you know that you've got a couple of big podcasts coming out and you've got some good signups and you've got some good customer feedback, and the developers have just pushed a nice feature there that people are really giving us good feedback about, you feel like, yes, this is momentum. You want to kind of keep it going, and that kind of flywheel of progress gets you really far. If you're thinking about unreasonable success, you need to keep that momentum going for a long period of time. So if you're going from zero and you want to become a multi-million turnover company, you want to become a billionaire, it's a long journey, and so therefore you need to keep going. You keep needing to move towards that goal, because if you suddenly have this kind of hiatus of progress for 5 years, suddenly that unreasonable success looks like a long way off, because you need to then regain that momentum and get that acceleration. I feel like to get that unreasonable success, you need to be really accelerating for a lot of the time. Otherwise, it's just those lofty goals are always too far away.
I guess I also see it as like trading up the chain and taking everything you've done so far and getting that to get you in the new doors. Like, I think that the reason we got a Forbes column was because of the 30 under 30. So it was like, okay, I'm going to take this win and I'm going to use it to be like, hey, I got this thing, now let me do this thing. And then if you've got like 3 coffee shops and you want to open another one, when you're putting the application forward for the other one, it's like, I've got 3 already, now I want to open a 4th. When it's like, you've got 4, I've got these 4 already, now I want to open this roastery, let me have this site. It's like everything you've achieved so far can be the thing that gives you a higher springboard for the next thing. And I think in between businesses, we definitely had that, because it was like we started the agency like from total scratch. But when we started Coach Fox, it was like we had a bigger springboard and we had bigger networks and we had more knowledge and we had more access to like different resources. And so it's almost like, how do you avoid that starting from scratch mentality? How do you start where you really, really are, not where you once were? And how do you use what you have now, what you want, rather than what you once had then? That was such a big mindset shift. And I feel like it's almost like being proud to use what you have and being happy to take the momentum and turn it into something else, rather than just being like playing it down or not celebrating it or explaining it away in some way, because there's something that's going on in your head that means you've got the goal of making things harder than they need to be, which many of us do by accident. And then the final one in the book is positive self-reinvention. So the ability to pivot, evolve, and shed limiting identities, which is a big part of just all of this.
It's linked to what you literally just said as well. Like, if you've got momentum, you basically are evolving. You need to realize that you are evolving. But I think I think that kind of goes without saying. We're kind of reinventing oneself to suit the new environment, whatever the market needs, whatever the business needs. But the idea of like pivoting is really interesting from an actual business standpoint as well. Like, you need to know when the business you're currently working on, or the direction of the business the ceiling is too low. It might even be growing, but you know the market size isn't big enough, or it's going to be really difficult to maintain that level of growth. Always being hungry for, well, where is the money? Where's the next move? Where am I getting ahead? And that pivot might be pretty big. Like, that pivot might be a change in business model. It might be a change in niche. It might be a change in the technology that you're providing. And I think always looking for the sign of the quick growth area is how you kind of get to that unreasonable success. Sometimes there's stories of platforms where the platform's growing, it's a SaaS company and it's growing, but there's this one feature that's like getting outsized attention from all the users. They're like, it's a really small like bolt-on thing that they've added, but everyone really loves it. It's like, oh, actually, no, that's the business. Like that's the thing we need to package up, sell separately. It's easier to market. People don't need to be educated on it, and they're willing to pay for it because it's solving a pain we didn't really realize they had, but the data is saying that's there. And it won't always be data led, it might be anecdotal, but there are often like, it's like success like has signs, doesn't it? It will tell you, you can't kind of ignore all the signs, especially if they're frequent, they're on the same thing. Like people are telling you, the world is probably telling you how to achieve unreasonable success, but you have to really listen and be open and prepared to actually say, do you know what I'm doing now, even though I've poured 10 years into it, isn't getting me to where I actually want, but this might. And pivoting in the right way is basically how you get there. Because if you look at nearly every single like multi-billion-dollar company, especially if it's a software company, it probably started off as something completely different.
Well, Instagram, it was making me think of Instagram. So Instagram sold to Facebook for $1 billion, but Instagram started off as Bourbon. It was called that, and it was some kind of app. I think it was a bit like Foursquare, where you kind of would add a picture and you would like check in somewhere. But the thing that really took off in Bourbon was the filters, the photo filters, the idea that when people uploaded their photo, they could choose from these like preset, like Valencia, and they had all these specific names. But people love that. And so I think the app makers realized that people were uploading their pictures using the filters and then like re-downloading them to like share elsewhere. So they were like, oh, this is a thing. So then they made that a photo sharing site, which became Instagram, which then is the Instagram that we know and love / hate right now. So it's going to be something, but the signs. Also, so this is 7 books that have definitely helped our kind of millionaire journey, but there's quite a few books that I read that didn't make the list, but there's also quite a few books where I feel like I don't actually have to read the book because the title gives me everything. And so one example of this is Die with Zero. Haven't read the book, but the title, Die with Zero. Yes, this is a really good idea. And then it's very similar with Who Not How. Haven't read the book, but the idea of the title, Who Not How. Yes, good idea. And so the third book of this type that I haven't read, but I love the title, is What Got You Here Won't Get You. What Got You Here?
You've put that.
The third one, we're not even going to edit this, so whatever. The third one is What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Definitely haven't read the book, but that's literally it. It's the positive self-reinvention of, I was Jodie 1.0, now I'm Jodie 2.0. You were Ben 1.0, now you're Ben 2.0. Like Jodie and Ben 2.0 make different decisions. Like they run different businesses. They have like new networks, new ways of thinking, new resources around them. So like use the new ones and be okay that when the new version of you is doing their thing, like the old version of you doesn't exist. And that's not sad. It's not like, oh, that's a shame. It's not anything. It just is like it's growth, and it's a really good thing.
What are some of the books that you've not mentioned that you think are worth checking out for people that in specific stages of their business? Because we've gone through from kind of like chronological order for us. So
I think The Art of Impossible is really good. That's Stephen Kotler, who is someone he didn't like invent the concept of flow, but he's definitely popularized it. Becoming Supernatural, Dr. Joe Dispenza is like a mindset shift, really interesting. Influence is a really good one.
What about The Alchemist? I know you really like The Alchemist.
Yeah, The Alchemist, the 5 a.m. Club. There are a few books that are like stories, and so they come across as fictional, but they've got a lot of message in there. Those are 2 of those. The Artist's Way is kind of in a similar vein to The Practice, but is a really nice way of just like the idea that you don't feel like working and then work, like you start working and then you'll feel like working as that goes along.
Because I think you did a good job of trying to read in themes, and I think that's something that you recommend quite a lot, because these books have like kind of, I guess, thesis, like this is the kind of vibe you're going for, and you could easily read 10 business books back to back on 10 separate topics that would just take you in all different directions. You wouldn't know where to focus. But as you've mentioned there with The Practice, The Artist's Way, The War of Art possibly fits into that as well. Yeah. Like if you're...
And Turning Pro and the other in that series for sure.
Yeah, so if you've got like there's something specific that you're really looking to improve on, reading 3 to 5 books on that same like mini genre can help you be like a really like, or help you master that element of your kind of skill set, I guess.
So one of the big themes that was a really useful thing to do altogether was just the books on focus and the books on avoiding addition bias, as Ben mentioned earlier. And that was like Stuffication, that was The Minimalists, that was Essentialism, The One Thing, and the idea of like less but better, and all the books, reading all the books on that theme to then like really, it's like you don't need to remember all the different stories, you don't need to remember all of it, you just kind of need to have the beliefs of the authors coming into your head so that you then start operating in that way. And it's very intentional. Like I'm so against just like listening to the latest podcast episode that everyone else is listening to and just reading that thing that everyone else is reading. Like I want to kind of figure out what I want to do first and then get all the influences together that are going to get me in that direction. I think that you could sleepwalk through consuming media and it's just not the way.
Yeah, there's definitely an idea that the more like books we read, the more smart we're getting, and therefore the more like tooled up we are at succeeding. But I don't like. I think some of the best business people in the world, the billionaires, like are they reading that many business books?
They read biographies. That's the crazy thing. Yeah,
they read biographies, and there's probably some biographies in there that would be good. But maybe that's a different episode. But
yeah.
The idea is that it just reading by itself is not going to make you successful. It's not going to take you to be a millionaire. Like it's always in the doing. It's always in the reassessment, evaluating, going where the money is. But reading books in themes can at least give you the chance to kind of actually onboard it and make something your own. I think because just reading the volumes, especially if it's scattered, seems to be a nightmare. There's always this one person, oh, what are you reading right now? Oh, how is that going? How is that going? Yeah, but when are you doing any work? Like, why is your business the same size as it was for like 3 years ago? It's because you're just reading the books and like going in one way while you're reading that book. You're reading a different book and doing something else now. It's
not connected.
You could so easily chop and change and just be following whatever the latest book you're reading's recommendations were. Whereas if at least you're reading one theme, you're like, okay, I'm doubling down on my focus right now, or I'm doubling down on thinking bigger right now, or I'm doubling down on how I invest or think about money. At least you could have a phase of like 1 or 2 months where everything is the same, bar this one variable that you're trying to get better at. And then of course you can see actually what is making that difference.
Be intentional. Don't read the books that everyone else is reading. Figure out what you want first and then reverse engineer from there and make your reading list based on what you want to achieve, not just like meandering around kind of following whatever trend.
Yeah, cool. Let us know if you've read any of those books. And as Jodie said, let us know if you want to deep dive on The Courage to Be Disliked.
That was another episode of Chats with Ben, where we covered the top 7 books that changed our money beliefs and put us on a millionaire trajectory to achieve it before the age of 30. Hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, give it a like, definitely subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next one.